in today's episode of the ImanWire podcast.
So the nature of Sadaqah in our tradition is one that at its essence is a burhan. It's a proof of the integrity of your faith. So if you find yourself penny pinching all the time, really keeping your dollars in your pocket, not, giving yourself every excuse not to give, right? Then you need to raja' imanak. Go back and check your faith a little bit. Something may be off. Because the companions, they were conditioned by Al-Habib sallallahu alayhi wasallam to give.
I'm honored to have our guest with us, Shaykh Yasir Fahmy, and we're looking forward greatly to your insights, to your counsel, to your advice. The topic of wealth ethics is something that is important to me, something that I don't think we address enough in our community from the deepest of spiritual and ethical perspectives. And yet we spend so much of our time, so much of our life interacting with wealth, whether we're working and earning, or we're buying and consuming, or maybe we're investing. There's just so much activity on a day-to-day basis with wealth. And we come to gatherings where we hear about the importance of Tazkiyah in particular. We hear about the dangers of greed, of coveting what others have, of preferring this world, over the akhirah. And on the other hand, we hear about generosity. We hear about trust in Allah Ta'ala. We hear about being content with the divine decree. And I'm really curious and interested in your thoughts and your counsel as to how we can more comprehensively, maybe more deeply apply and think about Tazkiyah, not only individually, but collectively in terms of our community organizations, in terms of even our businesses and our other interactions with wealth. When I think about the deen and I think about wealth, one of the first places my simple mind goes to is the 5 pillars of Islam, and it goes to Zakat. And what do you think that Allah Ta'ala is telling us by placing Zakat as one of the pillars of Islam? What is He telling us about wealth?
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ba'd. Whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees, and whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands, whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala incentivizes, and whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises in the Qur'an and through Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hadith genre, these are always points of deep reflection, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not spend time, if you will, elucidating the significance of a particular enterprise, except that He has a maqsid, except that He has an objective behind it. There's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us and speaks to us so much about wealth in general, in the form of zakah, in the form of sadaqah. We'll get into both of them, inshallah. But just I want to set this as a usuli frame, because the ulama of usul speak about this. When Allah speaks in such praiseworthy terms, or in such worrisome, nadhiri terms about those who do not give zakah, for example. We saw this manifest profoundly with Sayyidina Abu Bakr. When the Prophet ﷺ passed, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr was met with a situation where there's a community of believers who did not want to pay the zakat to him. And he ultimately went to war because of this. I will fight against anyone who does not pay the zakah, who does not give the zakah. And if you dismiss the zakah in totality, it could lead to being exiled, and excommunicated, and actually removed from the fold. So these are realities that we have to just come to terms with, the significance and the weightiness of it. But certainly there is something to say about zakah as a purifying agent. خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ. Take from their money that which will purify them and elevate them. And that's at the essence of the linguistic consideration of zakah. That there is something here about the purification, the naqa, the tazkiyah, and the tarqiyah, the elevation, the growth, right? The tanmiyah, right? That which is really nurtured and nourished and grown only happens in the form of ata, in the form of giving. So the Prophet is commanded, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. Take from their money. This is something that has to happen for the integrity of their faith, for the integrity of their theology, for the integrity of their ubudiyah. They can't realize servanthood if there isn't a function of ata, of giving, that's proactive in their mindsets. So, zakah as one of the 5 pillars of our sacred tradition is something you have to be mindful of, and you're calculating proactively. You're looking, especially if you have a business, how you have to do, a jard of you have to really assess, your how many products you have, how many assets you have, etc. So there's a proactive element around how you keep your eye on your wealth, right? There's a practical auditing of what you possess and what you own and how much must be dispersed. So it's very interactive. It's very engaging. You're not just passively, taking your income and giving it to a financial advisor and say, hey, make me a lot of money. No, you have your eye on an amana, a trust that Allah has bestowed upon you. So how are you dispensing that amana? It is a trust. And so the zakah, just as salah is a sacred trust, it's a sila between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sawm is a sacred act of worship. Allah says, as-sawmu li, fasting is mine. So then zakah takes on a whole other dimensionality in the material realm of this trust that Allah has endowed with us. I've given you wealth. And it's what we use to function, to transact, to move, to buy, to sell, to sleep, to tend, to fund our children's education, all of that. It's a big enterprise. It clearly takes up so much of our imagination. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then puts a distinct type of obligation where you have to be thoughtful and proactive about assessing your wealth, how much you have to spend in the form of that divine obligation. And then the maqsid of zakah is a distinct type of social welfare. So it has your personal well-being in mind, which is, you will be under the shade of your sadaqah and your zakah, and you will attain all sorts of spiritual stations and connectedness, and you'll fulfill your role as a abd of Allah. But then Allah has a social consideration, right? خُذْ مِنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ وَأَعْطِ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ خُذْ مِنْ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ لِفُقَرَائِهِمْ. Take from their wealthy to their poor. So there is a certain social welfare that is expected out of wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pinpointing. And we know this from the categories of zakah. The dominant majority of the categories are people who are dispossessed, people who don't have, people who really do rely on the generosity, quote unquote, the generosity, but in this case, it is the haqq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَا اقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةَ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةَ. They have not truly surpassed the hurdle, right? The real challenge that Allah has laid down. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةَ. And what do you think that this challenge is? What is Allah challenging us with? And this is within the realm of money. يَقُولُ أَهْلَكْتُ مَالًا لُبَدًا. This is what the ayah starts by. I have spent so much wealth. I spent so much money. Ahlakt, not meaning I spent it in the way of Allah. I destroyed my wealth. Ahlaktuha. This is someone who's, crying on the Day of Judgment. Oh, I spent all my money on nothingness, just pleasures and indulgement and joy and vacations and endless istihlak of money. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about this person, فَمَا قَتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةَ. This person has not passed the test. They haven't passed the challenge, the hurdle that I placed down. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةَ. What was this aqaba? فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ أَوْ إِطْعَامٌ فِي يَوْمٍ ذِي مَزْغَبَةٍ يَتِيمًا ذَا مَتْرَبَةٍ أَوْ مِسْكِينًا ذَا مَقْرَبَةٍ. Right? So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that the frame is, if you possess and you are someone who spends, the principal challenge of that wealth that you have been endowed with, entrusted with, is the extent to which you spend it on those categories. Right? Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, they say when he passed, he had, and the son of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anhuma, they say when he passed, he had freed 1,000 slaves. Because he understood this. And he would say, after the ayah of لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, that you won't attain piety until you spend from that which you love. He says, there's not one thing that came into my possession that I loved except that I spent it. Anytime something came into my possession, small or big, food, coins, belongings, lands, anything, I had to spend it because I wanted that birr, I wanted that virtue. And so he was proactively freeing slaves the way he did. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr, all the way in the beginning of the revelation, was freeing slaves because of this question, this matter. This is a question of, am I passing the test, the challenge that Allah has laid down for me? فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ أَوْ إِطْعَامٍ فِي يَوْمٍ ذِي مَزْغَبَةٍ, that you're feeding people. Feeding people is one of the most prophetic qualities. The seerah, I say this all the time, one of the core characters of the seerah is it'am, is feeding. If you're building out the story of the seerah and you want a main character, one of the main characters is food. Prophet ﷺ was always gathering people to feed them all the time. Every battle, there's one or two stories of feeding. Every juncture, he would never eat by himself. He would say, kathirul ayadi, increase the hands at your food, at your banquet. Because this is a question of it'am, and that's why from the first thing he told the people of Medina was, at'imu ta'am, afshu salam wa at'imu ta'am, feed people. And then you give, who do you give to? Yatiman dha maqraba, or miskinan dha. You give those who are orphans, who are close to you, people who are in need. Or those who are impoverished, who are dusty and destitute. This is the aqaba. Like if the question, if any one of us who Allah has endowed us with wealth, come on the day of judgment, and we say, oh my God, what did I spend my money on? Ahlaktu malan lubada. I wasted so much money. Right? And the only calculus for me spending was my pleasure. Can I maximize my pleasure? And that will be a moment of deep grief for the possessors of wealth. And then, so Allah says, this was the actual aqaba, this was the actual challenge that I laid down for you. It's spending on these categories. So Allah, when He sets up this standard, He's saying you have to be embedded in the ranks of the muhtajeen. You have to be. And that's why He told Sayyidina Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, when one day he said, in a moment of ghafla, that he was of more position and more status because he possessed wealth over the fuqara of the Sahaba. So he had a little bit of a faux pas. So the Prophet ﷺ turned to him, he says, Ya Sa'd, وَهَلَّا تُنصَرُونَ وَتُرْزَقُونَ إِلَّا بِدُعَفَائِكُم. Do you think that all the victory that we have, Allah has bestowed upon us, and the rizq, this sustenance, this wealth that Allah has bestowed upon us, you think it has come from anywhere except from the fuqara? Except through the avenue of the masakeen and the fuqara? That's where it came through. That's the avenue. If you want to say like which stream of income in my investment portfolio is gaining me the greatest returns, it's the fuqara. So the Prophet ﷺ would say, Allahumma ahini miskinan wa amitni miskinan wa hshurni fi zumratil masakin. I always want to be with the impoverished. The masakeen. That's where I want to be nestled and living in their auspices. And so this is an integral spiritual theological frame around money. That's why when you give, you don't give as if it is from top to bottom. You give from bottom to top. That's why you never give with your hand placed and your palm is to the air as if you're the one, or I'm sorry, your palm is down that you're giving them, but rather. You are graciously, they are graciously taking from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them as their right. Money should not, for us philosophically, be detached from the needy and the poor. It's intrinsically connected. Wealth and money, in terms of the categories of spending, whether in zakat or sadaqah, has everything to do with those in need. There's an expectation that Allah has for wealth and how it's meant to circulate, and to circulate within certain spaces within our community, principally the dispossessed and those who don't have, the travelers, the passerbys, all these people, the people who are newly come into Islam, because often those are those who are exiled from wealth. They may have had some wealth in their space of not being non-Muslim, but now they came into Islam, and that might have come with serious financial sacrifices, let alone the fuqara and the masakeen and so on.
What I hear from this is this notion of a right of the poor and the needy and the dispossessed, and also this idea that we have to keep thinking about giving. We have to keep thinking about sharing. We have to detoxify in this sense of zakat and tazkiyah linguistically, and detach and always be giving and sharing. If I can broaden from zakat to sadaqah for a moment, there are ayat in Surah Baqarah, for instance, that speak to the enormity and the gravity of riba as a sin. And then there are ayat that speak to sadaqah and that are encouraging and pushing us to give. What does it mean that these ayat are juxtaposed with one another, or next to one another, that these ayat of riba that have to do with wealth, they're a sin, don't do it this way. And then there's sadaqah, do it this way.
Yes.
What is that? What lessons can we draw from that juxtaposition in Surah Baqarah?
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a juxtaposition, a frame, which is the idea of generating material wealth in a manner that garners the displeasure of the divine. So you usurp and leverage the resources of the dunya to have material gain. And it's done in a manner that is harming to the welfare of society, of people, that there's a displacement of wealth. You're taking and you're really garnering wealth, and you're taking in a way that is unnatural, if you will, and immoral. You have to usurp someone else and really come hard on someone else to take it for yourself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is clearly indicating that the question of morality is intrinsically embedded in wealth generation. You cannot dispossess wealth generation from morality. It just doesn't work. So morality, ethics, virtue, it's intrinsically ingrained in it. And so therefore, any wealth that you take through usurpation, through any type of act of displeasure of the divine, will lead to decrease. Existentially, morally, even materially, it will lead to absolute decrease. It will be stripped of barakah. It will be stripped of blessing. So therefore, you could have 10,000, but it doesn't impact the equivalent of a person who has $1, but it's replete with blessing, with barakah from the divine. So on the other side, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us about those who earn and give in this sacred, pure manner. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they take that which is halalun tayyib, and then their eye is in the space of ata, of giving that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon me. That's why the Prophet ﷺ says, as-sadaqatu burhan. Giving sadaqah is proof. Spending in the way of Allah is a proof. What is it a proof of? It's a proof of the integrity of your faith. It's a proof of the integrity of your connection to Allah. Do you understand Allah as Ar-Razzaq? He has وَفِي السَّمَاءِ رِزْقُكُمْ وَمَا تُوعَدُونَ. In the heavens is your rizq and everything you are promised. So do you understand Allah as Ar-Razzaq? If you don't give sadaqah, then you don't affirm. There's the proof of the integrity of your faith and your conviction in God is in question if you're not giving. Because you don't understand. Because because I don't want to, I have it finally. I can't give it away. I'm worried. If I spend $1, you used to have 0. Now you have 10. What happens if I spend 5? Oh my God, I'm not sure I can really handle that. I can't take that hit. You sit there agonizing over your bank account, agonizing over your investment portfolio, your 401k, your Roth IRA, looking, agonizing. I can't lose this, right? Because I tie now, my children's welfare, as if now you are the Razzaq. And my children's welfare, and what they're gonna get, and the mirath, the inheritance, and all this kind of stuff, and you get yourself lost in the reality of the divine. That's why when you read our sacred tradition, you'll find those who gave. كان يعطي, as the Prophet ﷺ was described, كان يعطي عطاء من لا يخشى الفقر. And he would say to Sayyidina, let me translate that. He says they would give, the famous story is that after one of the battles, I believe it was Khandaq, Prophet ﷺ, had a valley full of camels, and so this Bedouin Arabi came and he saw all these camels, and he was standing next to that Prophet. So he asked the Prophet, "Is this yours?" He says, "Yeah." He said, all these camels. It's like a valley full of, Lamborghinis, if you will. Especially al-humur, like the red camels. They had a certain, value to them. So he says, yeah, of course I love these so much. Who would not love this? So the Prophet says, khudha, take it. Take all the camels. And so the man was like, atahza'u bi? Are you mocking me? You tell me to take all these camels? No, khudha, take it. If you like it, take it. And so the man started hishing away all his camels, going back to his, Bedouin tribe. And he said, oh, I met the greatest of men. The greatest of men. We should all follow him and believe him. فَإِنَّهُ يُعْطِي عَطَاءَ مَنْ لَا يَخْشَى الْفَقْرِ. He gives the giving of someone who does not fear poverty. There's no conception of poverty. That's why he will tell Sayyidina Bilal. Sayyidina Bilal, we all know who Sayyidina Bilal is, Ahadun Ahad. And this man who was tortured because he was a slave to the most ruthless of mushrikeen of Quraysh. The Prophet would tell him, Ya Bilal, anfiq. وَلَا تَخْشَ مِنْ ذِي الْعَرْشِ إِقْلَالًا. Spend and don't fear loss from the possessor of the throne. ذِي الْعَرْشِ. The one who has dominion over the throne. Don't fear decrease. فَمَا نَقَصَ مَالٌ مِنْ صَدَقَةٍ. There's no decrease in giving. It's only gains. That's why مَنْ يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا. Who will give Allah a goodly loan. To say that Allah, this is from Allah's Jamal and His kindness, to say, I have given you that, now give it to me as a loan back, and then I'll pay you dividends on it. Where it matters. So you come in the afterlife and you have all this infaq. And subhanAllah, you just see the dividends that are being paid off. Trees and gardens and homes and endless possessions of Jannah and Allah, na'im to, without end. Every single day, angels are designated to us. And these angels, they come down and they make a distinct dua. Allahumma a'ti munfiqan khalafa wa mumsikan talafa. Oh Allah, the angels make dua for each of us when they come down every day. And I just want you to think of the spiritual implication of this. And the angels make a dua for each of us. And they say, give, Ya Allah, we ask you to give the munfiq, the one who gives, khalafa, to give them more and extra, and that which comes next. So meaning they give, you replete, you finish, you refill, you replenish. And then the mumsik, the one who withholds, talafa. And the talafa means what? That something withers away. The one who withholds withers away. That's why when you hoard, the value, right, often decreases. Unless you put it into interest-bearing, that's why I say, you keep money in the bank, it loses its value. You have to put an interest-bearing. And people come with all these like fiqhi technicalities. Who told you to keep in the bank? Spend it. Spend it. Because if you hold on to it, of course it's going to lose its value, but it's going to lose its true value. Its spiritual value, not its, how it transacts and trades in the marketplace. So the nature of sadaqah in our tradition is one that at its essence is a burhan. It's a proof of the integrity of your faith. So if you find yourself penny pinching all the time, really keeping your dollars in your pocket, not, giving yourself every excuse not to give, right? Then you need to raji' imanak. Go back and check your faith a little bit. Something may be off. Because the companions, they were conditioned by Al-Habib sallallahu alayhi wasallam to give. The poet says famously, ما قال لا قط إلا في تشهده ولولا التشهد لكانت لاؤه نعم. The Prophet ﷺ never said no. People would ask of him, he would never say no. إلا في تشهده, he only said no in his tashahhud. لا إله. وَلَوْلَا التَّشَهُّدْ لَكَانَتْ لَاؤُهُ نَعَمْ. If it wasn't for the tashahhud, then his no would have been yes, na'am. So he only said yes. By the way, I've seen some scholars of seerah estimate that the net worth of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of what he spent, I have personally not verified this, but someone that I trust as a scholar who said this number is roughly around $2 billion of what he spent. I heard that I was shocked. But he actually goes into the seerah and he distills every moment of infaq of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he brings that spending of al-Habib to that number. He says, $2 million. It's a particular Sheikh Aoun from Jordan who says that. But the Prophet ﷺ, when he passed, he had loans that he had to pay, debts. And you know who he took his debts from? Or who he took his loans from? He didn't take it from Muslimin. He took it from the Jewish tribes of Medina. And the reason being, there's a hikmah, there's a reason behind it. And I'll give you back the mic with this, is that he knew if he took the loans from the community of believers, there's no way they would have him repay it. That's from his rahmah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when he wanted to take serious loans, that's why when he passed, he had debts that had to be paid to the Jewish community because of that. And they were paid off, alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah khair. There's a lot. There's really quite a bit to unpack and to try to, and we can spend hours, I think, extracting more from this. When if I try to take, and please correct me if I'm wrong, when I try to take this frame, these standards, these principles, and try to layer it on a little bit to business specifically, to investment activity, I look at riba, I look at sadaqah, I see riba as taking and usurpation, as you put it, and I look at sadaqah as giving. I see riba as extraction and exclusion. I'm going to push the poor away. I'm going to take from their resources, as the lender typically does with the borrower, at a macro scale, certainly. And when I look at sadaqah, I see a welcoming. Yeah. I see an inclusion. Yeah. And there's this opposition that the two have with one another. And I've seen this in my work. Designing different transactions and investments, and you can sometimes tangibly experience the contentment of some parties. They're content, they're pleased and trusting in the abundance of the divine. And as you put it in your comments, there was this, do not fear poverty. Right? There's this others that fear that scarcity, and so they want to write the contract so that they're taking and they're getting, and they're looking for the guarantee. They're looking for the rizq effectively from the counterparty, from the created counterparty, versus someone who says, we're interdependent. Let us share. When we go up together, we go down together, but we share, and we are side by side in the taking of risk and in the generation of wealth and in the sharing of wealth. And what I also hear is this interesting idea about perhaps reserving some portion, even at a organizational, institutional level, for the dispossessed, for the poor, for the needy, for other, legitimate recipients of sadaqah. And perhaps that should be something that becomes a hallmark of how Muslims, maybe American Muslims, whatever it might be, when they engage in wealth, they always gave. That's something that they would be known by and known for, rather than, some of the other things that we often see. Am I headed down the right track in this?
I think if we can put a frame around giving, and we set the tone around that, giving is a function of our theology, of our spirituality, our conception of servanthood, of ubudiyah. Embedded in that is ata, is giving, is infaq. And the nature of the Sahaba's giving was always, they were pushing the proverbial limits all the time. And وَكَانُوا يُسَابِقُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ. They would, really compete in how much, because they wanted to be the ones who gave the most. And this, if we're supposed to model our Islam after that generation, and we look at the ata of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, who gave everything. And when the Prophet asked him, the famous story when Sayyidina Umar came and he gave half of his wealth, he's like, finally I did it. And then how much did Sayyidina Abu Bakr give? He gave it all. He's like, he's always like outdoing me. But when the Prophet asked Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and what did you leave for your family? He says, I left for them Allah wa Rasuluh. What I reserved for them is Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for them, giving, and just so everyone who's listening knows, Sadaqah is the broader umbrella term here. And Zakah is enveloped within Sadaqah. And I wanna perhaps, just if I can, gentle reproach to my community is that we have reduced our conception of giving to Zakah. We want to get everything out of the way through Zakah. So I want to remove whatever, quote unquote, cognitive burdens around having to give to the community. Can I just do it through Zakah? The school needs money. Can I give Zakah? The masjid needs money. Can I give Zakah? This organization needs money. Can I give Zakah? We're defaulting to Zakah because we live in the world of obligations and fiqh. I just want to live my life and I have this obligation that I can't get out of. So here I'm going to give it. But can I do all of my conception of spending through Zakah? That type of myopic thinking around spending is antithetical to our tradition. Zakah is meant for that very basic social welfare. It's meant to be from خُذْ مِنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ لِلْفُقَرَاء. Take from those who possess to those who don't possess, and create an integrity in the social fabric. That's why there was no violent social stratification between the Sahaba, although there were those who had and those who did not have materially, but there was no conception that they were detached from each other. It's not palpable in the seerah. You can't read into it. You don't see Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Bilal somehow, being identifiably socially stratified, where, Sayyidina Abu Bakr is a part of the, the bourgeois, and Sayyidina Bilal is, in the worker class. That's not identifiable. It's not even palpable. Even Sayyidina Umar would say, Sayyiduna a'taqa Sayyidana. Our master freed our master. The money was purely a tool leveraged for basic welfare. We were absolutely equals. We loved each other equally. We cared for each other equally. We turned to Allah equally and together. We worshiped together. We fought together. We went to we did it fi sabilillah. And this is just it's like we're buying a cup of coffee. You have an extra $1? Yeah, of course. There's no stratification. It's not like, oh, you have the $1, I don't, so therefore I'm dispossessed and you possess. It's just that you happen to have $1 in your pocket, I don't. You can think about that at the level of, for example, when they were going to Tabuk, and the Prophet ﷺ needed someone to prepare the entire army of Tabuk. And this Tabuk was in the latter part of the Medina period. So this was a huge undertaking. This is when they were going to face the Rum. And the journey and the size of the army was unprecedented for the Prophet ﷺ, and the distance and the time and all of it. And Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, he's the one who هو من جهز جيش العسرة. He is the one who prepared and gave everything. That's not zakah. I just want to ask the community a question. Can we fund everything through zakah? No. The answer is no. We cannot. The Prophet ﷺ's community and the civilization that he constructed was not all done through zakah. It's not as if Sayyidina, Prophet ﷺ was asking, so Sayyidina Uthman said, yeah, Rasulullah, I don't mind helping with this expedition, but can I just pay this through zakah? Imagine the Sahaba thinking in the logic that we think. Where was Sayyidina Abu Bakr thinking, okay, I'm going to free all these slaves. Ya Rasulullah, you think I can put this under the, Now this was they were giving. Right? And there was the technical obligation of fulfilling zakah. So that was like a given. It's just like salah, 5 times a prayer, 5 daily prayers. And in usul, there's this concept of, the al-amr al-ta'abbudi, like the act of obedience that is ta'abbudi. Ta'abbudi means that it's pure servanthood. وَلَيْسَ مَعْقُولِ الْمَعْنَى. It's not necessarily rationally conceptualized. So why do we pray 4 raka'at instead of 3 for dhuhr? There's no rationalizing that. It's a ta'abbudi matter. You do it because you're supposed to. For example, hijab. What is the illah of hijab, of wearing hijab? It is obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's imtithal amrillah. It's fulfilling. There's a wisdom behind it, and that's called modesty, but that's a wisdom. It's not the wise purpose, not the illah. The illah behind it is ta'abbudi. Why hijab? Allah said so. So there is a logic, and I just want to highlight something here that, of course, there is a broader objective behind zakah and why it's what it's meant to be. But it's essentially framed in the space of ta'abbud. Why do you give 2.5%? Why do you give these many camels or these many cows or this many goat or sheep? You do that ta'abbudan because it's a matter of ibadah. Just like I'm praying my 5 prayers. That's why Prophet ﷺ says, Sayyidina Abu Bakr says, I will fight those who differentiate or distinguish between zakah and salah. Salah is pure ta'abbudi. When we think of salah, we don't think of, all the social ramifications and the civilizational ramifications. We think of an act of devotion. Of course, it has an impact on the broader society, but we think about it as a pure act of devotion. We should conceptualize of zakah as a pure act of devotion. Sadaqah is the space where we start really thinking proactively. When we think about wealth generation, power building, civilizational growth, institution building, that's in the realm of sadaqah. To try to say, we're going to build a civilization on the back of zakah, you've lost the plot. That you can't build. Zakah was meant for social welfare. Sadaqah is about civilizational growth and development. Sadaqah that's where it is. And all of the major land propositions, the land ownership, the real wealth of the prophetic community was all in the form of mostly in lands, right, that were they able to possess. And all of that came through sadaqah. None of that was zakah, right? The lands of the Banu Najjar, which was, you have the Prophet ﷺ's mosque, Abu Talha al-Ansari, the famous story when he gave the Prophet ﷺ the garden with Bi'ruha, which is in the back of you can see it now. If you go to the Haram, it's in the Bab Malik Fahd. That entire area was the garden of Abu Talha al-Ansari, and he loved it so much. Abu Dahdah famously giving his huge piece of land to the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because he wanted, that place in Jannah that was, some other man was offered a simple offering, but so I'll give it, take all my wealth. And all of this came from لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ. You will not attain piety until you give from what you love. The question I would pose to our community is, how much are we giving from what we love? Zakah money, we don't love it. We give it. I'll just be blunt here. If I can use some poetic license, it's just, we treat it like a tax, okay? So it's like you ask for donations. Hey, are you zakat eligible, by the way? That's the first consideration. Why? Because we think about it like a tax. I want to be able to use my tax, I want to write off. How can I write off stuff? We're always thinking in those very superficial, self-indulgent ways. Like, how is this going to personally benefit me? I was in a conversation recently, and I don't want to belabor this point, but I'm sure you have other frames. I'll stop here. But I was in a conversation recently where we were talking about funding a particular project, and the whole conversation devolved into just how can we go get loans from the community and how can we pay them back, and pay them back in a way where they're happy, so that you incentivize them to give. And these are all you're going to seek from wealthy people who possess a lot, who possess wealth. And I was like, wow, this is where we are right now as a community. That you can't ask for money anymore. You have to go and promise that this is a loan and here is your payback, and here's the schedule of, and you're number 1 or 2 or 3 on the list based on this whole super sophisticated structure of loan returns. Because the psychology of these people who are thinking about building an institution is that the community around me is not going to just give that kind of wealth. So we can take it in the form of loans. And I was like, perhaps this is a reflection on us in a way that we're not appreciating. And even those who are thinking and strategizing, we're thinking in this is just a matter of fact. Like, we're all corporate people, we're all business people, we're all people who kind of, live in this milieu. So this is the psychology of people today and how they think about wealth. And I don't think we scrutinize ourselves. And I mean by ourselves, I just want to say it's the children of the first generation, like our parents who came in the 60s and 70s, and in terms of the immigrant community in particular, how they thought about money, what money meant to them, and then us as their children who are now in their 40s and 50s, how we think and conceive of money, what money meant to them and what money means to us. And I don't think we appreciate how much our identities have been so egregiously shaped by money, by wealth. And so wealth has taken on, it's for us, it's existential, it's my identity. You want to take from me that which defines me. I have worked tirelessly, I got degrees and I made deals and I shifted and I pivoted and I invested early and I, use all these, this intelligence that I had to generate this wealth, and you want to take this from me? So it's very hard to give. So you ask yourself, how much do you give from that which you love? Well, that's the prophetic way, wallahu alam.
Jazakallah khair, jazakallah khair. You said many profound things, mashallah. And one of them I thought I would highlight is this notion of wealth as a tool and not wealth as a purpose, and working and investing and earning not as purposes in and of themselves, and not as, and even not founding and operating a business for the ultimate purpose of wealth, but rather wealth is a conduit, a means, a tools to something far greater and far more important, both for myself forever in the akhirah and for the community as a whole. When we look at Muslim history, so much of land throughout the Muslim world, anywhere from 1/3 to 3/4, depending on the region and the time frame, was endowed, was mawquf, but it was put into awqaf. And waqf, for our listeners, this idea of an endowment, this is from within the realm of sadaqah. So when you think about strategy, you think about theorizing, that as you said, that was this sadaqah is the space for that. And so much was accomplished of education, learning, scholarship, physical health, medical health, animal, bird life, etc., taking care of different poor people, so through endowments. And yet, again and again, I'm asked too often, how do I do it this way? Yeah. Well, you're not supposed to do it that way. That's why. And why is it taking so long? It's taking so long because you're trying to earn riba or some other unlawful return, but in the structure of something that is equitable.
Yeah.
And, we're having a tough time, walking that fine line, if you will.
Yeah. And subhanAllah, Sayyidina, the whole enterprise of endowments and awqaf were started by Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ through Sayyidina Umar. Because Sayyidina Umar, after Khaybar, he had come into a piece of land that he really loved. So he, standard issue, Sahaba behavior is, want to give this. I love this, I want to give it. And you have to understand, I think people don't appreciate how so many of these Sahaba were dispossessed. They did not have. And they only really start coming into some wealth. I mean, a good number of them, we know some of the big names, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Uthman, Sayyidina Abdurrahman al-Auf, and those others, and some others had, but most of them they didn't have. So even Sayyidina Umar, when he came into some wealth, it was not insignificant, especially after, in the latter part of the Medina period. So after Khaybar, he comes into this piece of land, and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I want to spend it. So the Prophet says, no, ihbisha. Ihbisha means, restrain it or tie it up, endow it, awqifha, and then spend from its profits, so that you will not pass this off as inheritance to your children. You don't possess it anymore, but you endow it, and then you pay the dividends off to the community. And we know that with the waqf of Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, he massive awqaf, massive endowment that now pays off. Today funds an entire hospital, funds an entire school. I mean, the awqaf of Sayyidina, which was started off as a well. So, a big spirit of infaq in the Muslim community was always endowments. The waqf system is what funded most of the civil society, was funded by awqaf. And it wasn't just the scholars and tullab al-ilm and the learning institutions. So much of the civil society was a function of what was endowed. And in the sijilat of the Dawla al-Uthmaniyya, when they look at the records of the Ottoman Empire, it said that 75% of the awqaf were actually set up by women because they had the most disposable income. The men were constantly having to do infaq on their families, their parents, and then the women had come into wealth that was disposable, and they were able to, so they would set up awqaf. So you look at, if you actually read and see, like, for example, you go to a country like Egypt and you see the awqaf that were established and set up. The entire northern coast on the water was almost all Azhari awqaf. You're talking about millions of acres of land that were set up as endowed properties to spend on the ulama of Al-Azhar, the students of Al-Azhar, the needs of Al-Azhar. You mentioned cats and dogs, all of them, the cats, the dogs, the pigeons, they all benefited from waqf. New pants, new shoes, all of that. Awqaf endowments were facilitating that. So, I know there is an increased discourse in the Muslim space on endowments, but I don't think our imagination around what the role endowments play is sufficient. Like, we are still I feel like we tend to think in a very small-minded way around this stuff. It's limited liability. How do I get it done without too much discomfort? No. If we're going to be prophetic about this, then we have to be the community of believers who give and endow substantial amounts. If we want to see the multiplier effect in ata and giving, then we have to give from what we have. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed us with, because that's the foundation of all the giving. If the Sahaba were the foundation, that's how they gave. Each one of them, so the Sadaqah, the infaq was constant, was always, it defined them. And then these endowments were set up. And like you said, and then of course with the dawn of the modern nation state, a lot of these central governments just usurp these endowments and say, okay, we can have all this wealth just around there. We're going to take it all for us. And then, the story, as many of you may know, continues there.
Maybe we shift gears just slightly and go back to something that we, or maybe me, highlighted early on, which is this idea of Tazkiyah as collectives. Can a business be abd? Should a business be abd? Or should I be, just worried about myself individually? I'm on the board. It's a business, or it's the local Islamic school. I'm on the board. I'm just thinking about myself. How do we translate some of these principles of ata and maybe some more specifics into Tazkiyah if you think it's appropriate, such as maybe muhasabah or muraqabah, for instance, or something else from the principles and practices. How do we translate these into collective, initiatives and efforts? How do we reflect these things in policy, in, collective actions, and so on and so forth?
I don't conceive, there's no idea of a believer where you're able to set up a structure that's independent of you, that operates kind of on its own terms, and your ibadah or your ubudi or your servanthood is just a personal enterprise. No, that's the business, that's the corporation. I'm just, like you said, sitting on the board. In Islam, that's not a conception that is ever realized or considered. It's illegitimate to think of any space where there are people who are organizing to construct and build and curate, that somehow our morality, our ethics, our principles are decoupled from that. So often today, especially with the generation, when we think about wealth, we automatically go to the default of, the capitalist system and how it thinks about wealth and the rules and the systems of wealth and the tools of wealth generation and the contracts and the laws and that reality is in of itself has an imperative, a philosophical imperative. It's not just some, neutral, meaningless contract. No, there is underlying subsumed meanings and desired outcomes. Well, when you do this, you maximize a particular type of personal welfare, right? So limited liability, well, you're not going to be harmed, but you're going to maximize this. You'll be able to profit on the back end. You'll be able to take this, package it that way, and then go get a tax relief over here, and then, subsume it into that. And there's all this, this kind of new age
legal tricks.
Yeah, but it actually comes from the likes of John Stuart Mill, philosophers 150 years ago, who were talking about that the objective of life is to maximize pleasure and to reduce pain. And we don't tend to make those ties, but there are all these philosophies. They were developed in the same time periods. There's a lot of philosophers who were coalescing around certain ideas and conceptions and how do we think about life. So we should also not be naive to say that this is just a business, or this is just a corporation. Here are lawyers. They give us some legal, jargon, legalese that we can think through, and the specialists, the people who know what they're doing. And sometimes I even hear this in the Muslim community, and I hear this, unfortunately, sometimes from shuyukh. Like, give it to the experts who know how to manage money. Well, how are they managing money? I'm not disagreeing with that. We should give it. There are experts who know how to negotiate and build wealth, and they understand the sophistication of the modern financial system, and we want Muslims well versed in that space. But the question is, when you're just deferring, but the moral, ethical imperative is absent from the fabric of that enterprise, and there's a real serious question. So I mean, there's so much room for us to explore, the question of quote unquote business ethics from an Islamic lens. Like so when you're thinking of partnerships, who are the partners? I've seen in multiple occasions where, men and women of Allah who really think through wealth generation in a divine lens, they'll make sure that Allah is a partner, and so that a fifth or a third or a fourth, whatever the divvied up, that this is going to go fi sabilillah, right? And they're going to collectively as a group take a decision to say, yeah, Allah, this is a portion that will be gifted, in your name. And then that does not, exclude that they were from their own shares, will be giving their own form of sadaqah and their own form of, giving their zakah and so on and so forth. So thinking about, that Allah's right, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, Inna Allah ya'muru bil adl, Allah commands justice. Imam al-Razi, when he talks about this ayah, he says that, that there is this divvying up of huquq, of rights. And in our mind, in our, modern secularized world, the rights are purely human. So it's your rights versus my rights. But Imam al-Razi says, وَأَوَّلُ حَقٍّ لَابُدَّ أَنْ يُرَاعَ هُوَ حَقُّ اللَّهِ. The first right that has to be attested for, or that you have to be mindful of, is the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you have to think, you're setting up a business. Where is the right of Allah here? Because the mindset is, well, I need to maximize my profit. That's like the default asl, maqsid, everything. The foundation, the objective is, how do I maximize my welfare? No. First off, where's Allah's right? And when I say Allah's right, I don't just mean fiqhiyan, because people also, we reduce everything to fiqh. And I think a lot of your framing, sets this structure up importantly. Why is it that we've reduced everything to a fiqhi consideration, right? So often, if you notice, most of the questions around Islamic finance or financing or wealth in general have to do with halal and haram. Technically speaking, is this halal or haram? I don't care about the opinions or the thoughts. I need to know the technicality here. But to your point, Islam, our religion, capital I Islam, is, the fiqh of it, in terms of the hadith Jibreel paradigm, the fiqh of it is the lowercase I Islam. It's one dimension. It's that first question of mal Islam. But then there is the question of iman and the question of ihsan. And so the theological considerations around wealth are far greater than the fiqhi considerations. And then the ihsani considerations of wealth are far greater, because they're subsumed within them are the iman and the fiqh, the lowercase I Islam. So when we think about a business or corporation, we have to be thinking in the language of Islam, iman, and ihsan. The fiqh of it, the theology of it, and the spirituality. What's the, when I was in business school, we studied, I had a previous life in venture capital in that world. But when we were in business school, we studied org behavior, and we would study the psychology of organizations and the incentivizing structures. And how do you incentivize people and motivate them and drive them? And it was all masalih, because some people, it was all like just benefits and personal interests. So some people, you incentivize them, you give them a title. You know what, Mahmoud, today you're a financial analyst. You know what you are tomorrow? You're a senior financial analyst. Oh, when you go home, takbir, you feel so good about yourself. I've made it. And there's people who love that. They don't need a financial incentivization. They just need a title, so they can go home and tell their family, I'm a senior financial analyst. But then there's others like, couldn't care less about the titles. Just give me a pay increase. I want to know what my stock options are. What's my bonus going to look like? So there is a psychology to these corporations and these organizations. This is a human enterprise. That's why they study these things. They study, human behavior and moods. You look at these more, look at Google and Apple and all these modern corporations. What have they created? A world of just luxury and pleasure and happiness and comfort, because you're going to come in here and live here. Here's the food. Here's the recreational activities. This is going to be your life, right? So for us as Muslims to just think about business in the language of purely money and profit, for me principally, is completely losing sight of, because to do that and to take on all that time and to, in reality, take on a debt, and the debt here is not just material, it's also a spiritual debt, because you're putting yourself in a really compromised situation. You just invested all these years of your life and all this time to gain some profits for yourself, not thinking about Allah, right? And the only consideration Allah got is what? technical fine line detail around maybe some zakah and like the legality of whether this is Islamically sanctioned or not, fiqhiyan. That's all Allah gets. You know, so when you talk about Sharia compliance, this language, you know, I'm very thoughtful about it, because we actually, when we talk about being compliant, are you compliant just technically, legally, potentially compliant? Are you spiritually compliant? Are you theologically compliant? Have we considered those dimensions of compliancy?
It gives me goosebumps, which would probably sound strange to many people when you speak of fiqh, and also you're noting these various spiritual considerations. All of the Islamic sciences have this interrelationship and close tie with them. And I see, you know, these ideas of tawakkul either reflected or not reflected in whether I'm seeking a way out or a way through, a way to fulfill and, you know, wholesomely, or a way to be, you know, merely compliant as if it were a governmental body of regulations. Perhaps what you know, my final question is this idea of thinking that you've raised, by which I mean, a lot of times our thought, our imagination is limited by our education. And most of us, certainly let's point the finger at myself, I'm educated here. Maybe you study business, maybe you study finance, maybe you study law, but you have certain assumptions and philosophies that underlie all of that. What advice would you give to those of us, I guess two buckets of people, those of us who are realizing we have some unlearning to do, and our youth, as well as our parents, but of youth who want to go to business school? I'm thinking, you know, principally there's a narration, and you'll know it far better than I will, where someone asks someone, please, I need a book on business written for me. And the scholar writes a book of zuhud, you know, a book of so-called asceticism, or, you know, renunciation of the material. And that's the response, right? Give me a book on business here, right? And, you know, that tells us something very different about growth and profit, right? Zuhud tells us something different. It flips the definitions on their head. So what counsel and advice would you give in this regard, Sheikh?
I mean, so, you know, any one of us will always be grounded correctly in this world when we situate ourselves in the realm of the afterlife. So whenever you make principial in your life the reality of the afterlife, you will become grounded and put on a proper trajectory in this life. So, for example, the Prophet ﷺ says that إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ. That when the son of Adam dies, they are cut off from their amal. Because we are actors in this dunya. We act, we do things. So all this stuff that we do, you know, the proverbial quote-unquote rat race, the hamster wheel, all this stuff, you know, which is just such unfortunate language because it reduces us to animals. And we have knowingly just appropriated this, like, yeah, I'm in the rat race. You know, the rat race. So you're either a hamster or a rat, or you're swamped.
Or time is money.
All this kind of stuff, right? So, but the Prophet ﷺ says that you are cut off, right? You're cut off from all of this action, except from three things: وَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ يَدْعُو لَهُ, or صَدَقَةٌ جَارِيَةٌ, أو علم ينتفع به. You have a righteous child. Righteous child does not have to be your biological child, by the way. It just has to be a righteous child. Because the walad is nakira. It's undefined. So it can be any child. The Prophet is not talking about biological children. Any child that makes dua for you. And that's righteous. And then a ongoing charity. So you have sadaqah that you've given that's paying you dividends in the akhirah. So you've taken your wealth. And then the last is علم ينتفع به. Knowledge that is of benefit. And if we're not careful and we don't essentialize these categories in our conception of how we invest time and energy and resources, then we really lost the plot, because the Prophet ﷺ is telling us these are the three categories, these are the buckets, these are the three pools that you have to always be swimming in. It's how much. Do you have people in your life who are going to be making dua for you? Do you know those people? I mean, I have sadly attended so many janazas, and I've seen, may Allah bless and protect our ummah. I'm not saying this in any like condescending or judgmental way, but I've seen people die and their children are there, and their children are in no way, shape, or form primed or conditioned or raised to make dua for them. Who's going to make dua for you? I sit there and I say, who's going to make dua for this person? And I make a promise to Allah, Ya Rabbi, please help me to make dua for him, because I really don't think that after the janazah, anyone's going to ever remember he existed. So who's going to make dua for them? So are you making that investment? You could be the most sophisticated, CEO. You've climbed the corporate ladder. You're the biggest shot in all the shots, and you have the homes in all the luxurious residential areas and so on. But if you don't have anyone making dua for you, what's the point? So just because you mentioned, like, is there anything I have to unlearn? Yeah, I have to unlearn the fact that maybe perhaps my entire conception of this whole life that I've invested, there was this rat race and I just became a rat. And I don't really realize why I was running and racing with all the other rats. I didn't really consider that calculus. So, do I have, okay, so Allah gave you and I knowledge, sacred knowledge, quote unquote, secular knowledge, quote unquote. I'm putting quote unquote not to say it's not sacred, but this is just because what people say. But all knowledge can be sacred. The ilm of al-nusus wa ilm al-ahwal wa ilm all of these ulum, the contextual and the textual, that's all knowledge of the divine. Because Allah's signs are in the Qur'an and Sunnah, and Allah's signs are in creation. So it's all ulum of the sacred realm. Okay, you have knowledge now in finance, in law, in engineering, and whatever, in business and wealth. Who do you teach, or do you keep it for yourself? Well, I've acquired this knowledge, so my expertise is for me, and I don't want to give all the secrets. Is the knowledge that Allah has given you? Your greatest hope after you die from here is that people who remain here are benefiting from the knowledge you have, and every single one of us has knowledge. It's not just the scholars and the ulama and our great mashayikh of the ummah that have the knowledge. No, it's everyone, every single one of us, to the smallest, that have knowledge. May Allah rahmatullahi alayhi, Shaykh Abdul Mat'al, who was one of my father's shuyukh, and I recall distinctly, he was a scholar from Al-Azhar, and he was, a man, mashallah, has written like dozens and dozens of books of mustalah hadith and ulum and so many different sciences within our tradition. And what I remember is that when we were going to school, Shaykh Hamdan would be visiting from upstate New York, and instead of sitting in the front next to my dad, he would sit in the back with us, and he would teach us the dua of rukub, the dua of riding the car. So Subhanallah, and he would repeat it for us. So I remember those moments distinctly. And here is a scholar who has so much knowledge, he was like, really talk about a targeted investor, someone who really knew how to look at, today if you're like in property, or you're trying to, like, you're in construction, or you're always looking for properties and lands, and where's, oh my God, you have a pocket listing, you have this, that, whatever. Well, that's his mindset, but around teaching people. So I want to teach people dua, teach people Fatiha. That's why, for example, I don't want to, this is perhaps in the whole other conversation, but everyone scoffs at teaching kids. So we say, teaching kids is like this burden. So let the people in the peripheries of our community do that. Kind of, there's this arrogance and this attitude that's very dismissive around Sunday school, around Islamic schools, right? And it's like, okay, we'll have these nice, sweet heart aunties and whoever. I'm not in no way, shape, or form speaking in any demeaning or besmirching fashion. No, wallahi, they are giants, because they are the ones who are going to pass with having a endless amount of wealth, having taught children how to read the Fatiha, how their ABCs, that basic knowledge. They possess that wealth. But not us, because we were too important. We were in boardrooms striking big deals, but who gathered knowledge from us? And we can dispense so much knowledge, right? Sharing it, in that spirit of infaq. And all of these are infaq, by the way. All the categories of when you pass are infaq. And the last one being, I said all three of them: the Sadaqatun Jariyah, the ongoing charity, and the teaching, and the Waladun Salih. So, I would encourage all of my brothers and sisters who are listening to use the terms of ihsan that you've spoken about, which are muraqaba and muhasaba, to really hold yourself critically accountable. What do I think about this massive part of my life? Listen, Allah did not make it that we would spend the lion's share of our life thinking about money. And then how could it be that this is not going to be a huge part of our muhasaba? You know what I'm saying? Like, if Allah made it, that if it's just percentage of, breaking down a percentage of time, how much in the span of, let's say you're awake for 18 hours, how much of that time are you thinking about money? Spending it, attaining it, growing it. Okay, all that time, you don't think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to hold us accountable for that time? So if it's clearly such a significant part of our identity, that's why all these ayat and ahadith that talk about when you spend, Allah will give you this and He'll give you that and you'll be in Allah's shade. As-sadaqatu tudfi'u ghadab al-Rabb, that, giving will quiet the anger of the divine. SubhanAllah, quiet the anger. So many theological, spiritual frames for ata and giving. Oh, I definitely have to work on unlearning all of my conceptions of money and the meaning of money and the purpose of money that were inculcated into me through just habituation and being saturated in a secular milieu, to now saying, all right, put me deeply within the theocentric frame. I want to know about money in the realm of an ta'buda Allah ka'annaka tarah mushahada. I worship Allah as if I see Him, so I want to witness Allah in all of my financial transactions. And if I don't see Him, He sees me. So I'm very thoughtful that Allah's mindful, Allah's aware of every dollar and cent. There's no, PL statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not know exactly every line item of it. And if you situate yourself there as a Muslim, as a corporation, as a community of believers, talk about the identity of our community and we see. I mean, I promise, khalas. I know there's so much more to say, but I just want to. The Prophet ﷺ said one thing. He says, "I don't fear poverty for you. ما الفقر أخشى عليكم ولكن الدنيا تنافسوها كما تنافسوها وتهلككم كما أهلكتهم." I'm not worried about you becoming poor. I'm worried about the dunya, right, opening up to you. And then you pursue the dunya. And then it destroys you the way it destroyed them. What I'm worried about you is the dunya. I'm not worried about poverty. We're terrified of poverty. The Prophet's not worried about poverty for us. The Prophet is, what he's worried about is how much is the dunya going to consume you. Right? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us, true spiritual liberation. That this material wealth is in our hands and we are prophetic and that we give it and there's no emotional, psychological attachment to it. Even if I find myself preferring it, take it. Akhi Umar, wallah, it's yours. You like my car, take it. I'm serious. I'm not even exaggerating. This is what the Sahaba do. Why can't we do that? You like my belongings, take it, alhamdulillah. I'm not attached to it. I like it. I enjoy it. It's pleasurable. Yeah, alhamdulillah. If I have it, nice. If I don't have it, alhamdulillah. So may Allah gift us that type of spiritual insight and fortitude and show us the truth as truth and bless us to follow it and show us falsehood as falsehood and bless us to stay away from it. Barakallahu feekum.
Thank you to all our listeners for joining us. Please share it with friends and family. If this podcast or any Al-Madina program has benefited you, to help us keep this work going, we invite you to support us by becoming a monthly sustainer at almadina.org/ansar. That's almadina.org/ANSAR. Until the next episode, Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you.